My adopted twins didn't know siblings were supposed to protect each other, and their story exposed generational horror. The social worker called at 8:43 on a Thursday morning to tell me they'd found my children. Not children I'd been searching for, but children who'd been searching for someone like me. Twins, she said. 6 years old, brother and sister. They'd been removed from their fourth foster placement in 18 months, and the system was out of options. Behavioral issues, she explained in that careful voice social workers use when they mean something much worse. The boy was violent toward his sister. The girl was completely nonverbal despite having no medical reason for it. They needed someone experienced with severe trauma, someone who wouldn't give up when things got difficult. I'd been certified as a therapeutic foster parent for 3 years, specializing in cases other families rejected. My husband Dean and I had taken in 11 kids during that time, helped them heal enough to move to adoption or reunification. We'd seen abuse patterns, attachment disorders, developmental delays. We thought we'd seen everything. The twins arrived on a Saturday afternoon in September, delivered by a transport worker named Gina, who looked exhausted. The boy, Callum, got out of the van first. Small for 6, maybe 40 pounds, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that tracked every movement like he was calculating escape routes. His sister Nora stayed in her seat until Callum went back and took her hand. She followed him with her head down, blonde hair falling forward to hide her face. Gina handed me 2 trash bags containing their belongings and a file folder 3 inches thick. She said good luck in a tone that suggested we'd need it, then drove away before I could ask questions. Dean carried the bags inside while I knelt down to the twins' eye level. Callum immediately stepped in front of Nora, physically blocking her from my view. His hands were clenched into fists and his jaw was set. I introduced myself and Dean, explained this was their new home for as long as they needed it. Callum said nothing. Nora made no sound. I showed them to their room, which we'd prepared with 2 beds, thinking siblings would want their own space. Callum looked at both beds, then pushed them together so hard the frames scraped across the floor. He positioned himself on the outer edge, creating a barrier between Nora and the door. She climbed onto the inner bed and curled into a ball facing the wall. Dean and I exchanged glances. In 3 years of fostering, we'd never seen a 6-year-old arrange defensive sleeping positions like a soldier expecting attack. I suggested they might want to see the rest of the house, the backyard, maybe have a snack. Callum shook his head once. He wasn't leaving that room until he'd assessed every threat, and his sister wasn't leaving without him. We left them alone and went downstairs to read their file. The documentation was horrifying in what it included and even more horrifying in what it carefully avoided saying directly. Born to a mother with severe addiction issues who'd lost custody when they were 18 months old. First foster home lasted 6 months before they were removed due to the foster father's inappropriate behavior that resulted in criminal charges. Second placement lasted 4 months until the foster mother reported she couldn't handle Callum's aggression toward Nora. Third placement ended after 3 months when neighbors reported hearing screaming and seeing bruises. Fourth placement lasted 5 weeks before the foster parents called emergency services, saying Callum had attacked Nora with a kitchen knife. The report from that incident was paper-clipped to the back. Callum had indeed grabbed a knife, but the foster mother who witnessed it said he'd grabbed it to defend Nora from the foster father, who'd been advancing on her with his belt. The foster father claimed he was just going to discipline her for wetting the bed. Callum had held the knife with both hands, trembling but refusing to move, until police arrived. He was 6 years old. The psychiatric evaluation ordered after the knife incident noted that Callum exhibited extreme hypervigilance and protective behaviors toward his sister that were developmentally inappropriate and obsessive in nature. The evaluator recommended separation to allow both children to develop individual identities and healthier attachment patterns. The recommendation made me physically sick. They wanted to split up 2 traumatized children because the boy's protection of his sister was too intense. That evening, I made spaghetti, which the intake form said they both liked. I brought 2 plates up to their room since they clearly weren't coming downstairs. Callum took both plates, set one next to Nora, and waited. She didn't move or look at the food. He picked up her fork, twirled some spaghetti onto it, and held it near her face. After a long moment, she opened her mouth and let him feed her. He fed her 3 bites, then took 1 bite himself. 3 for her, 1 for him. The pattern continued until her plate was empty and his was 3/4 full. I asked if he was still hungry. He looked at me like I'd asked a stupid question. Of course he was hungry. He was always hungry. But Nora ate first. Nora ate more. That was the rule, and rules kept them alive. I brought him another full plate. He stared at it suspiciously, waiting for the catch. When I just left it and walked away, he ate so fast I worried he'd choke. Over the next few days, we established a routine. The twins stayed in their room most of the time. Callum would emerge for bathroom trips, always checking the hallway first, always positioning himself between Nora and any adults. She stayed behind him like a shadow, never making eye contact, never making sound. Dean tried engaging them with toys, books, and offered to watch cartoons. Callum accepted a deck of cards and spent hours teaching Nora games, his voice low and patient. When she made mistakes, he never corrected her harshly. When she got something right, his whole face would transform for just a second into something that looked like pride before the guarded expression returned. I called their previous caseworker, a woman named Tessa Moreno who'd handled their file for the past year. She was relieved they'd been placed and asked how the violence was manifesting. I told her there was no violence. Callum was protective, yes, intensely so, but I'd seen no aggression except in defense of Nora. Tessa was quiet for a moment, then said every previous placement had reported Callum hitting, pushing, or threatening his sister. The foster parents had photos, statements, documented incidents. She'd been told he was dangerous and needed residential treatment. Asked her to send me those reports. They arrived by email an hour later, and reading them made my blood run cold. Every single incident of violence followed the same pattern. Nora would do something small, spill a drink, drop a toy, fail to respond quickly to an adult. The foster parent would react with anger or punishment. Callum would intervene, physically putting himself between them. In the struggle, he'd sometimes shove Nora out of the way or grab her arm to pull her behind him. The foster parents documented these moments as him attacking her. They photographed bruises he'd caused while yanking her away from danger. They wrote statements describing his rage without mentioning what triggered it. The reports painted a picture of a violent, unstable child. But when I looked closer at the details they'd included, I saw a different story. A story of a 6-year-old boy who'd learned the only way to protect his sister was to make himself the target instead. That night, I heard footsteps on the stairs at 2 a.m. I found Callum in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the cabinets. He froze when he saw me, expecting punishment. I asked what he needed. He said nothing for a long moment, then whispered that Nora was thirsty. I got a cup, filled it with water, and handed it to him. He looked at the cup like I'd given him something impossible. I told him he could get water whenever they needed it, day or night. He could get food from the refrigerator if they were hungry. This was their home, and they didn't need permission for basic necessities. He nodded, but didn't believe me. I'd have to prove it through consistency over time. I went back to bed and watched on the baby monitor we'd installed in their room. Callum helped Nora sit up, held the cup while she drank, then tucked her blanket around her before lying back down on the outer edge of their pushed-together beds. His eyes stayed open, watching the door. He didn't sleep. I started documenting everything with detailed notes and photos that showed context. Callum arranging Nora's food, Callum checking the locks on windows, Callum sitting on the floor outside the bathroom while she used it, standing guard. None of it was violence. All of it was protection. I called Tessa back and asked for contact information for the twins' biological family. She said their mother had died of an overdose 8 months ago. No father listed on the birth certificate. No other relatives had come forward. They were alone in the system except for each other. I asked about the mother's parents, and Tessa said the maternal grandmother was listed in the file as having visited once while the twins were in foster care, but the visit had ended badly. The grandmother had screamed at the foster parents and been escorted out by police. She was noted as hostile and unstable, and banned from future contact. Something about that description bothered me. A grandmother who fought to see her grandchildren was labeled hostile. I requested the incident report from that visit. It took 3 days to get approved, but when I finally received it, the details were illuminating. The grandmother, Patricia Rourke, had arrived at the second foster placement to find Nora locked in a closet as punishment for not speaking. She'd demanded they release her immediately. When the foster parents refused, saying it was necessary discipline, Patricia had threatened to call police and child services. The foster parents called police first, claiming she was trespassing and making threats. Patricia was removed, and a note was placed in the file preventing her from unsupervised contact. I found Patricia's phone number in the file and called before I could second-guess myself. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary. I introduced myself as the twins' current foster parent. She immediately asked if they were okay, if they were safe, if anyone was hurting them. The desperation in her voice was real. I told her they were safe. She started crying, those deep sobs that come from months of helpless fear. She said she'd been trying to get custody for 18 months but kept getting denied because of the incident report that labeled her unstable. Her daughter, the twins' mother, had been her baby. She'd watched her spiral into addiction after an abusive relationship, had tried everything to help. When her daughter died, Patricia thought she'd at least be able to save her grandchildren. But the system saw her as part of the problem, another link in a chain of dysfunction. I asked her what she knew about the twins' early childhood. Patricia's voice went flat. She said her daughter's boyfriend, the twins' father, though he'd never acknowledged them, had been an evil man. That was the word she used. Evil. He'd hurt her daughter in ways Patricia only learned about after she'd escaped. By then, the twins were 8 months old and had already learned to be silent. Patricia had only seen them a handful of times before her daughter ran again, too afraid to stay anywhere long. She said the boyfriend had a rule about children. They were meant to be silent and invisible. If the girl made noise or drew attention, the boy was punished. If the boy fought back or protected his sister, the girl was punished. They'd learned to keep each other quiet, to keep each other hidden. Callum had learned that protecting Nora meant absorbing consequences meant for her. Nora had learned that making sound or asking for help meant Callum would suffer. I asked if Patricia would be willing to testify to all of this for the court. She said she'd do anything to get her grandchildren back. That weekend, I decided it was time to test a theory. I told the twins we were going to the park. Callum's immediate response was to push Nora toward their room, trying to hide her. I explained they were both coming, both safe, just going to play outside. He didn't believe me, but he also couldn't refuse without knowing what punishment would follow. At the park, other children were playing on swings and slides, parents watching from benches. Callum positioned himself and Nora near a tree, away from everyone else. He sat with his back to the trunk, Nora tucked against his side. They watched the other kids with an intensity that broke my heart. I sat nearby and waited. After 20 minutes, a soccer ball rolled toward them. A boy about 8 years old ran over to get it, saw the twins, and smiled. He asked if they wanted to play. Callum wrapped both arms around Nora and pulled her closer. The boy, not understanding, kicked the ball gently toward them as an invitation. It stopped a few feet away. Nora's eyes followed the ball with obvious interest, but she didn't move. Callum's grip tightened. The boy picked up his ball and left, confused. Dean came over and sat down. He said very quietly that it was okay if they wanted to play. Nobody would hurt Nora. Nobody would hurt Callum. They were allowed to be children here. Callum looked at him with those two old eyes and said, "You don't know what happens when she plays." The words hung in the air. I asked what happens. Callum said when Nora played, when she laughed or made noise or had fun, bad things happened after. Someone would get angry. Someone would say she was too loud, too happy, taking up too much space, and then the bad things would happen to him while she had to watch. So she learned not to play, and he learned not to let her. The strategy that had kept them alive in their early environment was now preventing them from healing. They were still following rules from a nightmare they'd escaped. Over the next weeks, I worked on showing them those rules no longer applied. I made noise deliberately, laughed loudly, played music. Nothing bad happened. I encouraged them to make messes, to take up space, to exist visibly. Progress was microscopic. Callum started eating his full plate instead of giving most to Nora. Nora made eye contact once or twice. They ventured downstairs during the day, though always together, always ready to run. I scheduled them for therapy with Dr. Leon Voss, who specialized in childhood trauma. The first session, Callum refused to let Nora go in alone. Dr. Voss said they could both come. They sat on the couch with Callum's arm around Nora, a united front against the world. Dr. Voss didn't push. He just talked about safe things, showed them his office, explained that therapy was a place where nothing bad happened. When the session ended, he told me privately that he'd worked with traumatized children for 20 years and had never seen a bond quite like theirs. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, necessary for survival but preventing individual development. He said separating them would be catastrophic, but they needed to learn they could be safe apart. I started with 5-minute separations. Callum would go to the kitchen with Dean while Nora stayed in the living room with me. Callum spent the entire 5 minutes rigid with panic, unable to focus on anything except listening for sounds from the other room. When reunited, he'd check Nora over completely, looking for signs of harm. We increased to 10 minutes, then 15. After 3 weeks, we managed 30 minutes with Callum only asking to check on her twice. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when I was making pancakes. Callum and Nora were at the kitchen table, and I deliberately burned one pancake, filling the kitchen with smoke. I swore, grabbed the pan, scraped the burned pancake into the trash. Callum immediately went rigid, preparing for violence. I just laughed, said oops, and started another pancake. No anger, no punishment, no making anyone else pay for my mistake. Callum watched me carefully. I made another mistake on purpose, overpoured batter so it spilled over the edges. I said a cheerful whoops and cleaned it up. Still no anger. The tension in his shoulders started to ease. When I served them perfect pancakes, Callum took a bite and then did something extraordinary. He smiled. Not the careful, guarded expression I'd seen before, but an actual child's smile of simple pleasure. Nora saw him smile and her eyes went wide. Then so quietly I almost missed it. She giggled. The sound was tiny, rusty from disuse, but unmistakable. Callum's head whipped toward her in panic. She'd made noise. In his experience, that meant consequences. But I just smiled and said, "Those are pretty good pancakes, huh?" Nothing bad happened. Nora had made sound, expressed joy, existed audibly in the world, and nothing bad happened. Callum looked between his sister and me several times, recalculating. That afternoon, I heard laughter from their room. Real laughter, both of them, playing some game with the cards. I stood in the hallway and cried with relief. I called Patricia and told her about the progress. She asked when she could see them. I said I was working on it, gathering evidence to present to the court. I needed to show that the twins' behavioral issues were trauma responses, not inherent violence. That they needed therapeutic intervention, not separation. That Patricia was their family and deserved a chance to prove she could provide a safe home. I compiled everything. Photos showing Callum's protection, not aggression. Therapy notes from Dr. Voss documenting their progress. Statements from Patricia about their early trauma. The pattern of misrepresentation in previous foster homes. I scheduled a meeting with Tessa and brought a lawyer friend, Nina Blackwell, who specialized in family advocacy. We laid out the case methodically. Every incident reported as violence, recontextualized with proper information. The grandmother, who was labeled hostile, actually trying to protect her grandchildren from abuse. The recommendation to separate the twins, based on misunderstanding their survival mechanisms. Tessa listened to everything, reviewed the documentation, and admitted she'd been working with incomplete information. The previous foster parents had shaped the narrative to justify their own failures. The system had accepted that narrative without investigation because it was easier than admitting children had been further traumatized while in state care. She agreed to support Patricia's custody petition if Patricia completed parenting classes and home studies. We scheduled the first supervised visit for the following week. I prepared the twins by showing them pictures of Patricia, explaining she was their mother's mother. She loved them. She'd been trying to reach them. Callum studied the photos with intense concentration. Finally, he asked if she was the loud lady from before, the one who'd made the other people let Nora out of the dark place. I realized he remembered Patricia from that incident at the second foster home. He'd been 4 years old, but he remembered her fighting for them. The visit took place at a family center with a supervised playroom. Patricia arrived 15 minutes early, pacing in the parking lot. When we walked in with the twins, she froze. Her hands came up to her mouth and tears started immediately. She said their names like prayers. Callum positioned himself in front of Nora automatically, but Patricia didn't approach. She knelt down 10 feet away, making herself smaller, less threatening. She said she'd missed them so much, that she'd been trying to bring them home, that she was so sorry she couldn't protect them before. Callum studied her with that calculating expression. Then he asked the question that made everyone in the room stop breathing. "Will you hurt her if I'm bad?" Patricia's face crumpled. She said never. Absolutely never. If he was bad, if Nora was bad, if anyone was bad, nobody would get hurt. That wasn't how family worked. Callum didn't believe her. I could see it in his eyes, but he wanted to believe her. The visit lasted 2 hours. Patricia sat on the floor and talked to them about their mother, showing them pictures on her phone. Their mother as a little girl, the same age they were now. Their mother laughing, playing, being loved. She told them how their mother had tried to keep them safe, how she'd loved them even when she was sick, how she'd asked Patricia to take care of them if anything happened to her. Nora moved closer, drawn by the pictures. Callum let her go but stayed alert. Patricia showed them a video of their mother singing. In the video, she was healthy, young, holding a baby in each arm and singing, "You Are My Sunshine." Nora made a sound, a little whimper of recognition. Patricia said softly, "You remember, baby. She sang this to you every night." The visit ended with Patricia giving them a bag of items she'd saved. Their mother's favorite sweater, soft and worn, a book she'd read as a child, 2 stuffed animals that had been theirs as babies. Callum accepted the bag like it was made of glass. At home, they took everything to their room. I watched on the monitor as Callum spread the items out carefully. He held the sweater to Nora's face, and she buried her nose in it, breathing deep. He gave her 1 stuffed animal and kept the other. That night, they slept holding the animals, wrapped in their mother's sweater. Over the following weeks, visits with Patricia increased in frequency and duration. Callum's guard lowered incrementally. He started calling her grandma. Nora started making more sounds, not words yet, but progress. Dr. Voss reported significant improvement in both children. Patricia completed her parenting classes and home study with perfect scores. Her house was evaluated and approved. We started overnight visits. The first time I dropped them off at Patricia's house, Callum asked if Dean and I would be there when they came back. I promised we would. He nodded, then did something that shocked me. He hugged me. Quick and awkward, but real. 4 months after they'd arrived in trash bags, the court hearing for custody transfer took place. Nina presented our case with devastating efficiency. She walked the judge through every mischaracterized incident, every failure of the system, every trauma inflicted while the children were supposed to be in protective care. She showed videos of the twins playing, laughing, healing. She had Dr. Voss testify about their progress, and his professional opinion that placement with Patricia would be in their best interest. The previous foster parents were subpoenaed. The couple from the 4th placement, who'd called police when Callum grabbed a knife, testified first. Under Nina's questioning, they admitted Callum had been defending his sister. They admitted they'd documented the incident in a way that made him look dangerous, because they didn't want anyone to know they'd been about to beat a 6-year-old with a belt. The couple from the 3rd placement, asked to explain the bruises neighbors had reported, claimed the children were clumsy and injury-prone. Nina presented medical records showing the injuries were consistent with physical punishment, not accidents. The couple from the 2nd placement, the ones who'd locked Nora in a closet, didn't appear. A warrant was issued for their arrest related to the original charges from Patricia's intervention. The system had protected these people, placed more children with them after removing the twins. The judge's expression grew darker with each testimony. Patricia testified last. She spoke about her daughter's struggle with addiction, her own failures in protecting her desperate attempts to reach her grandchildren after her daughter's death. She acknowledged her mistakes, her angry outburst at the 2nd placement that got her labeled hostile. She said she'd do it again. She'd always choose fighting for her grandchildren over being polite to people who were hurting them. The judge asked Callum if he wanted to live with his grandmother. Callum looked at Patricia, then at Nora. He said yes, but only if Nora could come too. They didn't get separated. The judge said they would absolutely stay together. Then he asked Nora if she felt safe with Patricia. Everyone waited. Nora hadn't spoken in anyone's hearing since before she'd entered foster care. We'd heard sounds, giggles, whimpers, but no words. She looked at Callum. He nodded encouragement. She took a breath and in a voice barely above a whisper said, "Grandma is safe." The courtroom went silent. It was the first time most people there had heard her voice. The judge's eyes filled with tears. He cleared his throat and ruled that custody would be granted to Patricia Rourke immediately, with 6 months of supervised transition and ongoing therapy requirements. The children would go home with their grandmother that day. Afterward, Patricia hugged Dean and me, sobbing thank you over and over. I told her the twins did the hard work. They survived. They protected each other when no one else would. They learned to trust again. She shook her head and said we saved them. I said no. We just finally listened to what they'd been trying to tell everyone all along. Callum had never been violent toward his sister. He'd been protecting her the only way a traumatized 6-year-old knew how, and every adult who should have understood had instead pathologized his love. Nora had never been defiant in refusing to speak. She'd been following the rules that had kept her brother safe, and every adult who should have recognized trauma had instead labeled her difficult. The system had failed them repeatedly, but they'd never failed each other. We helped Patricia load their belongings into her car. Not trash bags this time, but proper suitcases we'd bought them, filled with clothes that fit and toys they'd chosen. Callum carried Nora's stuffed animal and his own. At the car, Nora turned back and ran to me. She wrapped her arms around my legs and whispered, "Thank you for teaching Callum." I knelt down and asked what I'd taught him. She said, "That protecting doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means letting someone help." I lost it completely, crying while this little girl patted my shoulder comfortingly. Callum came over and took her hand. He looked at me seriously and said, "You're good people. If we need help again, can we call you?" I gave him my phone number written on a card. I told him I'd always answer. Always. They drove away with Patricia, and Dean and I stood in the driveway watching until the car disappeared. The house felt empty. We'd had them for only 4 months, but they'd changed everything. A week later, I received the full investigation report into the twins' foster care history. The second placement foster parents had been arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse. The investigation had uncovered evidence that at least 6 other children placed with them had experienced similar treatment. The third placement couple had their foster license permanently revoked after a pattern of excessive physical punishment was documented. The fourth placement father was under investigation for assault. Nina called to tell me the system was implementing new protocols for investigating reports of violence between siblings in foster care. Callum's case would be used in training to help social workers recognize protective behaviors versus aggression. Dr. Voss published a paper about the twins' case in a professional journal, changing identifying details but keeping the core pattern. He argued that trauma-informed care required understanding survival mechanisms, not pathologizing them. Patricia sent updates regularly. The twins were adjusting well. Callum had started first grade in their neighborhood school and was making friends. Nora was in kindergarten and participating in play therapy designed for nonverbal children. She was starting to use simple words, building vocabulary slowly. They still slept in the same room by choice, but Callum was learning he didn't have to be hypervigilant constantly. Nora was learning that speaking, laughing, and taking up space were safe. 3 months after placement, Patricia sent a video. The twins were in her backyard running through a sprinkler. Callum was laughing, actually laughing, and chasing Nora, who was shrieking with joy. They tackled each other in the grass, gentle and playful, just 2 kids being kids. At the end of the video, they both waved at the camera. Nora shouted, "Hi, Aunt Lauren! Hi, Uncle Dean!" We weren't their aunt and uncle officially, but Patricia had given them permission to adopt us as family anyway. 6 months after placement, Patricia called to invite us to the twins' 7th birthday party. We drove to her house with carefully chosen presents. The party was small, just Patricia, her sister, a few kids from school, and us. The twins ran to greet us when we arrived. Nora hugged me without hesitation. Callum showed me his room, pointing out the bookshelf Dean had built him, now full of books he was reading above grade level. At the party, they played games typical 7-year-olds play, pin the tail on the donkey, musical chairs. When it was time for cake, Patricia brought it out with 7 candles lit. Everyone sang happy birthday. The twins blew out candles together, holding hands. Afterward, Callum pulled me aside. He had that serious expression he got when something important was on his mind. He said he wanted to tell me something he'd never told anyone. I waited. He said when they were really little, before foster care, things were very bad. He didn't remember a lot, but he remembered making a promise to Nora. He'd promised he'd keep her safe no matter what, even when it hurt, even when he was scared. He'd promised they'd stay together. He'd kept that promise, but he'd almost lost her anyway because everyone kept trying to split them up. I told him he'd done an incredible job keeping his promise. He shook his head. He said he'd learned something important, that keeping someone safe doesn't mean doing it alone, that asking for help isn't breaking a promise, that protecting someone can mean letting them be protected by others too. He said I'd taught him that, and Dr. Voss, and Grandma, that there were good people who would help if you let them. I asked what made him trust us. He thought about it and said it was the pancakes. The way I'd made mistakes and just laughed instead of getting angry. The way nothing bad happened when Nora made noise. He said that's when he started to believe maybe the rules had changed. Maybe he could stop fighting alone. The party wound down. Kids left with their parents. Patricia started cleaning up with her sister. Dean was helping the twins build a complex fort out of cardboard boxes Patricia had saved. I watched them play. Watched Callum show Nora how to reinforce the walls. Watched her giggle when he tickled her. Watched them both collapse the fort on purpose and laugh in the rubble. They looked like normal kids. Happy kids. Safe kids. Before we left, Nora asked if we'd come back for Christmas. Patricia seconded the invitation, saying we were family now whether we liked it or not. We promised we'd be there. In the car on the way home, Dean said fostering was supposed to be temporary, but somehow we kept collecting permanent family. I said that's how it worked when you cared about people. They became yours and you became theirs, and it didn't matter what the legal documents said. 2 years later, we attended the twins' adoption finalization hearing. Patricia legally adopted them, giving them her last name, making official what had been true from the moment she'd fought her way past police to get them out of that closet. Callum was 8, confident, doing well academically and socially. Nora was 8, verbal, bright, still quieter than her brother, but no longer silent. In the courtroom, the judge asked if they had anything to say. Callum stood up. He thanked Patricia for never giving up on them. He thanked Dr. Voss for teaching him about feelings. Then he turned to where Dean and I were sitting and thanked us for seeing what no one else had seen. For understanding that protection looks like love when you've never been taught the difference. Nora stood next to him and said in her clear voice that she wanted to thank everyone who believed them when they couldn't use words. Who understood that sometimes kids know how to keep each other safe better than adults do. The judge finalized the adoption. Patricia cried. Her sister cried. Dean and I cried. The twins hugged everyone and we took pictures on the courthouse steps. That evening, we all had dinner at Patricia's house. The twins showed us their latest school projects, their artwork, their report cards full of good grades and teacher comments about how helpful and kind they were. After dinner, while Patricia and her sister cleaned the kitchen, the twins asked if we'd come upstairs to see something. In their room, still sharing despite having a whole house with extra bedrooms, they'd made a poster board. At the top, it said, "Our family," in marker, decorated with stickers. They'd glued photos in a complicated web of connections. Their mother in the center, young and healthy in the pictures Patricia had shown them. Lines connecting her to the twins. Lines connecting the twins to Patricia. Lines connecting them to Patricia's sister. And lines connecting them to Dean and me, labeled Aunt Lauren and Uncle Dean who saved us. Callum explained the poster was for a school project about family trees, but his teacher said family could be whoever loved you, not just blood relatives. So they'd made a family web instead of a tree, showing all the people who were connected to them through love and protection. I looked at that poster and felt the weight of what we'd done, what Patricia had done, what the twins themselves had done. We'd broken a generational cycle of trauma. We'd refused to let the system's failures define these children's futures. We'd listened when they told us, in 100 nonverbal ways, what they needed. Patricia came upstairs and saw us looking at the poster. She put her arms around both twins and said, "This is what healing looks like. Not forgetting the past, but building something beautiful anyway." We stayed until late, playing board games and watching movies. The twins curled up between their grandmother and us on the couch. When we finally left, they stood in the doorway waving, backlit by warm yellow light from the house. They looked so different from the terrified children who'd arrived in trash bags with their trauma mischaracterized as violence. They'd learned that siblings could protect each other without it being the only thing that defined them. That safety could come from adults, not just each other. That asking for help was strength, not weakness. That speaking their truth mattered even when others tried to silence them. The system had failed them repeatedly, labeling their survival mechanisms as pathology, their love as dysfunction, their trauma responses as behavioral problems. But they'd survived anyway, held each other through it all, and come out the other side with their bond stronger but healthier. Now they were just kids. Kids who'd been through hell and learned to trust heaven existed too. Kids who knew the difference between protection born from fear and protection born from love. Kids who understood that family wasn't about blood or law, but about who showed up when things got hard and stayed until things got better. Driving home, Dean said he'd been thinking about taking another placement, someone who needed what we could offer. I said yes, knowing there were more children out there whose stories were being misread, whose trauma was being misunderstood, who needed someone to look deeper and see the truth. We'd keep doing this work. Keep fighting for kids who needed advocates. Keep believing that even the most broken systems could be navigated when you refused to accept the official narrative and insisted on seeing the children as humans with stories that mattered. The twins had taught us that, and we'd carry those lessons forward to every child who came through our door, every family we helped reunify, every time the system tried to tell us what we were seeing instead of listening to what we knew. Because sometimes the people labeled as problems are actually the ones with solutions. Sometimes the behaviors classified as violence are actually the purest form of love. And sometimes the children everyone else gave up on are exactly the ones who change everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.